Marcus Reynolds parked his sleek black car a block away from the bank, adjusting his simple watch as he stepped out. It wasn't the expensive one he usually wore to board meetings. Today he'd left all the trappings of wealth behind. Dressed in worn jeans and a plain button-up shirt that had seen better days, he looked nothing like the successful businessman who had recently acquired Regional Trust Banking, a chain with 15 branches across the state. The sun beat down as he walked toward the red brick building. This particular branch was in a predominantly white neighborhood, and Marcus had chosen to visit it personally for a reason. As a black man who had built his fortune from nothing, he made it a habit to occasionally experience his businesses from a customer's perspective. No special treatment, no advance notice, just a regular person walking in off the street. Let's see what kind of service they really provide, he muttered to himself, clutching a check for $85,000 from a recent property sale. It was a legitimate check, but substantial enough to raise eyebrows. The cool air conditioning hit him as he pulled open the heavy glass door. The bank was moderately busy for a Tuesday afternoon. A young teller smiled at an elderly couple, while two loan officers chatted with customers at their desks. Marcus got in line, noticing how the security guard's eyes followed him a bit longer than the other customers. When his turn came, the teller's smile seemed to fade slightly. "How can I help you today?" she asked, her tone professional but noticeably cooler than with the previous customer. "I'd like to deposit this check." "Please," Marcus said, sliding it across the counter along with his ID. The teller's eyes widened slightly at the amount. "Do you have an account with us?" "Not yet. I'd like to open one today," Marcus replied. "One moment, please." She picked up her phone. "Mrs. Blackwell, I have a situation at counter 3. Marcus raised an eyebrow but remained silent. He'd been through this before, though he'd hoped things might be different at his own bank. A few minutes later, a middle-aged woman with perfectly styled blonde hair approached. Her navy blazer had a name tag that read Patricia Blackwell, branch manager. "Is there a problem?" Marcus asked politely. "Sir, would you mind stepping into my office to discuss this deposit?" Her smile didn't reach her eyes. Marcus followed her to a small office with glass walls. Inside, Mrs. Blackwell took the check, examining it under her desk lamp. "This is quite a large sum," she said, her voice tinged with suspicion. "Yes, it's from a property sale, all legitimate." Marcus kept his voice calm despite feeling his heart rate increase. "This was a familiar dance. And you have no existing relationship with our bank?" "Not yet. That's why I'm here." Mrs. Blackwell pursed her lips. "Where did you get this check exactly?" Marcus took a deep breath. "As I said, it's from a property sale. I have the closing documents if you need to see them." He reached for his phone to show the email confirmation. "That won't be necessary," she said, though her tone suggested she didn't believe him. "Our policy for new customers is that we place a 2-week hold on deposits over $10,000, especially for," she hesitated, "unusual cases." "What makes this case unusual?" Marcus asked, though he knew the answer. "Well, the amount, for one thing. And we don't know you. We have to be careful about fraud these days." Marcus leaned forward slightly. "I understand being careful, but I've provided ID and the check is verifiable. You could call the issuing bank right now." Mrs. Blackwell's smile tightened. "I think we'll need additional verification. Perhaps you could bring a utility bill or other proof of address, and we'll need to contact the issuer directly." "Is this standard procedure for all new customers?" Marcus asked. "For deposits of this nature?" "Yes." Her eyes didn't meet his. "I see." Marcus watched as she held the check up to the light, then scrutinized his ID again. "Actually," she said finally, sliding the check back toward him, "I'm not comfortable accepting this today. There are several inconsistencies that concern me." "What inconsistencies?" Marcus asked, genuinely surprised. "The check stock seems unusual, and frankly, this amount for a new walk-in customer raises red flags. I would suggest you return to the issuer and request multiple smaller checks, or perhaps try a check cashing service instead." She gave him a tight smile. "They might be more equipped to handle your situation." The implication was clear. She thought the check was fraudulent, and more importantly, she thought he was a fraud. "You're refusing to deposit my check?" Marcus clarified, keeping his voice level despite the anger and humiliation rising inside him. "I'm suggesting alternatives that might better serve your needs," Mrs. Blackwell said smoothly. standing up to signal the end of their conversation. We have certain standards and procedures that we follow to protect our institution. As she walked him back to the lobby, she added in a lower voice, between us, checks of this size are usually handled by our private banking department. With proper appointments and documentation, they typically deal with a different clientele. Marcus felt eyes on him as he walked across the lobby, the undeposited check burning a hole in his pocket. He'd experienced discrimination before, at restaurants and stores with police, but something about this particular incident struck deeper. Maybe because he literally owned the building she had just escorted him out of. Outside in the parking lot, he pulled out his phone and called his executive assistant. "Michael, it's me. Can you set up a meeting with the regional director of branch operations for tomorrow morning? And pull the personnel file for Patricia Blackwell at the Oak Street branch." He paused, looking back at the bank. "No, nothing's wrong. I just had an educational experience that I think might benefit the entire organization." As he walked back to his car, Marcus considered his options. He could fire her immediately. He could close the branch. He could file a formal discrimination complaint. But none of those options would address the larger issue. What happened to him today happened to Black people across America every day, regardless of their wealth or status. By the time he reached his car, a plan was forming. This unfortunate incident could become a powerful teaching moment, not just for one prejudiced bank manager, but for every employee in his newly acquired company. Sometimes, he said to himself as he started the engine, people need to see their own reflection clearly before they can change. Tomorrow would be interesting indeed. The next morning dawned bright and clear. James pulled into the executive parking lot of the Regional Trust Banking headquarters, his mind still replaying yesterday's humiliating experience. He had barely slept, turning over different approaches in his mind. As the new owner of the bank chain, he could simply fire Patricia Blackwell, but that wouldn't solve the deeper problem. He straightened his crisp navy suit as he walked into the building. Today he looked every inch the successful businessman he was. Custom-tailored suit, polished leather shoes, and the gold watch his father had given him when he graduated from business school. "Good morning, Mr. Reynolds," the receptionist greeted him warmly. "The regional director is waiting for you in the conference room." "Thanks, Linda," he replied with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Robert Chen." The regional director of branch operations stood as James entered the room. He was a competent man who had been with the bank for 15 years and had survived 3 ownership changes. "James, good to see you," Robert said, extending his hand. "Your assistant mentioned you had an issue at the Oak Street branch." "Let's call it an opportunity for improvement," James replied, shaking Robert's hand firmly. "I need you to clear your schedule for the afternoon. We're making an unannounced visit." Robert raised an eyebrow but nodded. "Of course. May I ask what this is about?" "You'll see soon enough." James took a seat. "But first tell me about Patricia Blackwell." Robert pulled up her file on his tablet. "Branch manager at Oak Street for 7 years. Consistently meets her targets. Customer satisfaction scores are above average. No major complaints. She's due for her performance review next month. Any issues with diverse customers?" Robert hesitated. "Nothing on record, but Oak Street isn't in a very diverse neighborhood. Their customer base is predominantly white upper middle class." James nodded slowly. "That's about to change. The bank's new diversity initiative will be launching there first." By 2 p.m., James and Robert were pulling into the Oak Street branch parking lot. James had briefed Robert on yesterday's incident during the drive, watching the man's face shift from disbelief to dismay. "I had no idea," Robert said as they parked. "If what you're describing is accurate, it's completely unacceptable." "It's more common than you might think," James replied. "Let's see how she reacts today." The same security guard who had watched James suspiciously yesterday now rushed to open the door for the 2 well-dressed men. Inside, the atmosphere of the bank changed immediately as Robert walked in. Staff straightened up, smiled nervously, and whispered to each other. Patricia Blackwell emerged from her office, her professional smile freezing when she spotted Robert. "Mr. Chen, what a surprise. We weren't expecting you today." "Mrs. Blackwell," Robert nodded. "I'd like to introduce you to someone." He gestured to James. "This is James Reynolds." Patricia extended her hand automatically, still smiling. "Welcome to Oak Street branch, Mr. Reynolds. Are you joining our regional team?" James took her hand, holding it a moment longer. And necessary. Not exactly, Mrs. Blackwell. I acquired regional trust banking last month. I own the bank now. The color drained from Patricia's face as recognition dawned. Her eyes darted from James's face to his suit, then back again. You were here yesterday? I was, James confirmed, his voice calm but firm. I came in to deposit a check and open an account. You refused my business and suggested I try a check cashing service instead. The nearby tellers and loan officers had gone quiet, watching the scene unfold. Patricia's hand trembled slightly as she lowered it. Mr. Reynolds, there must be some misunderstanding. We have procedures for large deposits from new customers. Do those procedures include holding checks up to the light and suggesting that they're fraudulent? James asked. Or perhaps they involve making assumptions about people based on their appearance. Patricia's face flushed red. That's not what happened. Mrs. Blackwell, Robert interjected, his voice professional but cold. Perhaps we should continue this conversation in your office. The walk to Patricia's office felt like a march to the gallows for the branch manager. Employees watched wide-eyed as the three of them disappeared behind the glass door. Once seated, Patricia immediately began damage control. Mr. Reynolds, I want to apologize if you felt mistreated yesterday. That was certainly not my intention. We have strict security protocols. James held up his hand. Mrs. Blackwell, let's not pretend this was about security protocols. I've been banking since I was 16 years old. I know what discrimination looks like. I would never, she started. The thing is, James continued, I don't believe you woke up yesterday planning to discriminate against anyone. I think your actions were driven by unconscious biases that you might not even recognize. Patricia stared at him, her mouth slightly open. Tell me, James leaned forward, if a white man in a suit had walked in with the same check, would you have questioned its authenticity? Would you have suggested he go to a check cashing store? The silence in the room was deafening. Patricia looked to Robert for support, but his face remained impassive. I don't know, she finally admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. James nodded. That's an honest answer, at least. He pulled out the same check from yesterday and placed it on her desk. This is a legitimate check from the sale of a commercial property. I own 6 such properties in this city alone. Yesterday I wanted to open an account at this branch to see how my new acquisition treated its customers. What I experienced was unfortunately all too familiar. Patricia's eyes welled with tears. Mr. Reynolds, I don't know what to say. If you want my resignation, I don't, James interrupted, surprising both Patricia and Robert. You don't? Patricia blinked in confusion. Firing you would solve nothing. Another person with the same unconscious biases would take your place, James explained. Instead, I want you to help me solve a bigger problem. He pulled out a folder and handed it to her. This is the outline for a new diversity and inclusion initiative that will be implemented across all our branches. Oak Street will be the pilot location. Patricia took the folder with shaking hands. You have 2 options, Mrs. Blackwell, James continued. You can resign today or you can become part of the solution. You can help us build a banking environment that truly serves all community members equally. Robert leaned forward. The choice is yours, Patricia, but I hope you'll stay and help us improve. Patricia looked down at the folder, then back at James. Why would you give me this chance? After how I treated you? James smiled slightly. Because firing people doesn't change systems. And because I believe people can grow when they're confronted with their own biases. He stood up and buttoned his suit jacket. You have until tomorrow morning to decide. If you choose to stay, you'll work directly with our new diversity consultant to implement these changes. It won't be easy, and you'll have to face some uncomfortable truths about yourself and this institution. Patricia nodded slowly, still processing everything. Oh, and Mrs. Blackwell, James added as he reached the door. I still want to open that account, but this time I think we'll do it right. As James and Robert walked through the main lobby, employees quickly pretended to be busy. News had clearly spread that something significant was happening. Do you think she'll stay? Robert asked quietly as they exited the building. James looked back at the bank, the sun reflecting off its windows. I hope so. Real change doesn't come from punishment. It comes from people recognizing their mistakes and choosing to do better. In his car, James loosened his tie and took a deep breath. Today had gone according to plan, but this was just the beginning. One branch, one manager at a time, he intended to transform his bank into an institution that truly served everyone with dignity and respect. Sometimes, he said to Robert, the most powerful thing you can do with authority is not to punish, but to offer a chance for redemption. As they drove away, James knew that regardless of Patricia's decision, the Oak Street branch would never be the same again. Patricia sat alone in her office long after James and Robert had left. The folder lay open on her desk, but she wasn't really seeing the words anymore. Her mind kept replaying the moment when she realized who James Reynolds actually was, the look in his eyes when he reminded her how she had treated him the day before. The office had emptied out. Through the glass walls, she could see the cleaning crew moving between the desks. She should have gone home hours ago, but the weight of the decision before her kept her rooted to her chair. Her phone buzzed with a text from her husband. "Dinner's in the oven. Everything okay?" She typed back a quick response and finally began gathering her things. The folder went into her bag. She would read it again at home, away from the shame that seemed to cling to the walls of her office now. The drive home was a blur. Her mind kept jumping between defensive justifications. She was just following procedures. Anyone would have been suspicious of such a large check, and crushing realizations of how her actions must have looked, how they must have felt to James. When she pulled into her driveway, she sat in the car for several minutes, gathering her courage. Inside, her husband Thomas was reading on the couch. "You're late," he said, looking up from his book with concern. "Bad day?" Patricia dropped her bag and coat and sank down beside him. "I messed up, Tom. Really badly." Thomas set his book aside and listened as Patricia recounted everything, how she had treated James when he came in dressed casually, the assumptions she had made, and his return today as her boss. When she finished, Thomas was quiet for a long moment. "Do you remember when we were first dating?" he finally asked. "We went to that restaurant downtown and they kept us waiting for an hour even though there were empty tables? And the waiter barely looked at us?" Patricia nodded slowly. "You didn't see it then," Thomas continued. His voice was gentle, not accusing. "I told you they were treating us differently because I'm Asian, and you thought I was being too sensitive." Patricia felt tears welling up. "I remember." "This is your chance to see what I've been seeing all along," he said, taking her hand. "So what are you going to do?" The next morning, Patricia arrived at the bank an hour early. She had barely slept, but her decision was made. When James arrived with Robert and a woman she didn't recognize, Patricia was waiting for them in the conference room with coffee and a determined expression. "Good morning," she said, standing as they entered. "I've decided to stay if you'll have me. I want to be part of making things right." James nodded, his face giving away nothing. "I'm glad to hear it." He gestured to the woman beside him. "This is Dr. Olivia Wilson. She's a specialist in diversity and inclusion training, and she'll be working closely with you over the next few months." Dr. Wilson stepped forward with a warm smile and extended her hand. "I'm looking forward to our collaboration, Patricia." They all sat down and Patricia pulled out a notebook. "Before we start, I want to say something." She took a deep breath. "Yesterday, after you left, I kept trying to justify my actions to myself. I told myself I was just following protocol, being cautious. But the truth is, if a white man in a suit had walked in with that check, I wouldn't have questioned it for a second." Her voice wavered slightly. "I'm sorry, and I'm ready to learn." Something in James's expression softened. "That's a good place to start." Dr. Wilson opened her laptop. "I've reviewed the diversity initiative outline that James created, and I've developed a specific implementation plan for this branch. We're going to begin with something called a blind spot workshop for all staff." The meeting lasted 2 hours, with Dr. Wilson outlining a comprehensive 3-month plan. Patricia took detailed notes, asking questions and offering insights about her team's dynamics. By the end, the initial awkwardness had given way to a focused sense of purpose. "We'll need to close the branch for a full-day training next Tuesday," Dr. Wilson concluded. "I'll send you the materials to distribute beforehand." As they were wrapping up, James's phone rang. He checked it and stood up. "I need to take this. Robert, can you and Dr. Wilson go over the budget details with Patricia? I'll catch up with you later." After he left, Patricia turned to Robert. "He's really giving me another chance?" Robert nodded. "James believes in second chances, but he also believes in accountability. This won't be easy, Patricia. You're going to have to comfy." Want some uncomfortable truths, not just about yourself, but about how this bank has operated. I understand, she said, and for the first time she thought maybe she really did. The following Tuesday, Patricia stood nervously at the front of the branch as all 15 employees gathered before opening hours. Dr. Wilson was setting up a presentation, and James had just arrived, taking a seat at the back of the room. "Good morning, everyone," Patricia began, her voice steadier than she felt. "Thank you for coming in early today. As you may have heard, there have been some changes since our new owner took over." She glanced at James, who gave her an encouraging nod. "Last week, I had an experience that opened my eyes to problems I didn't want to see before. I treated a customer differently because of how he looked, and that customer turned out to be Mr. Reynolds." She gestured toward James. "Instead of firing me, he's giving us all an opportunity to do better." A murmur ran through the staff. Some looked shocked, others uncomfortable. A few nodded in understanding. "Today is just the beginning," Patricia continued. "We're going to learn about unconscious bias, the assumptions we make without even realizing it, and then we're going to change how we do things around here." Dr. Wilson stepped forward and began her presentation. She started with simple exercises that revealed how everyone in the room, including herself, carried hidden biases. The mood shifted from defensive to reflective as the morning progressed. During the lunch break, Patricia found herself sitting across from James in the break room. "How are you holding up?" he asked, unwrapping his sandwich. "It's intense," she admitted, "but necessary. I keep thinking about all the people I might have treated differently without even realizing it." James nodded. "That's the hardest part, recognizing that bias isn't always conscious hatred. Sometimes it's just unexamined assumptions that we've absorbed from the world around us." Patricia pushed her salad around with her fork. "Can I ask you something? Why did you decide to come to this branch that day, of all the branches you now own?" James considered the question. "When I was doing my due diligence before buying the bank, I looked at customer demographics across all branches. Oak Street had the lowest percentage of Black and Hispanic customers, despite being only a few miles from diverse neighborhoods." He shrugged. "I wanted to see why. And now you know," Patricia said quietly. "Now we both do," he corrected her. "And now we can fix it." The afternoon session was even more challenging. Dr. Wilson had them role-play difficult customer interactions, then analyze their responses. Patricia found herself growing defensive when one of the tellers pointed out how differently they treated customers based on their clothes or accents. "We're trained to look for certain risk factors," Patricia argued. "Are we?" The young teller pushed back. "Because I never got training on what those factors actually are. It seems like we're just making judgments based on how people look or talk." The room went quiet, and Patricia felt her face flush. "That's a good point, Alicia," Dr. Wilson said. "Let's break down what actual risk factors might be versus assumptions based on appearance." By the end of the day, Patricia was emotionally exhausted but filled with a strange new energy. As everyone was leaving, she found herself face to face with James again. "Thank you," she said simply. "For what?" he asked. "For not taking the easy way out? For not just firing me and moving on?" She hesitated. "It would have been simpler for you." James shook his head. "Easy doesn't create change. And I didn't buy this bank just as an investment. I bought it to transform it." As she watched him walk away, Patricia realized that her banking career had just taken a turn she never expected. The coming months would be challenging, uncomfortable, and probably painful at times. But for the first time in years, she felt like she was doing something that really mattered. That night, as she told Thomas about her day, he smiled and squeezed her hand. "Sounds like you found a pretty remarkable boss." "No," Patricia corrected him. "I found a teacher." Over the next few weeks, the Oak Street branch transformed. What began as uncomfortable training sessions slowly evolved into genuine conversations and real changes. Patricia found herself at the center of it all, working closely with Dr. Wilson to implement new procedures and rethink old habits. The morning started like any other. Patricia arrived early, coffee in hand, mentally preparing for the day ahead. Today marked 1 month since that fateful encounter with James. 1 month since her world had been turned upside down. She was reviewing the new customer greeting protocol when her office phone rang. "Mrs. Blackwell." "It's Anthony from the call center." "We've got a situation I think you should handle personally." Patricia frowned. The call center rarely forwarded issues directly to branch managers. What's happening? There's a gentleman on the line who tried to open an account online but got flagged by the system. He's upset because he was told to come into a branch with additional documentation, and he feels it's discriminatory. He specifically mentioned your branch because it's closest to his business. Patricia felt her stomach tighten. This was exactly the kind of situation they'd been working to address. Transfer him to me, please. The call connected and Patricia took a deep breath. This is Patricia Blackwell, Oak Street branch manager. I understand there's been an issue with your application? The man on the other end sounded frustrated but controlled. Yes. I'm trying to open a business account for my construction company. I uploaded all the required documents, but your system flagged my application for additional verification. When I called to ask why, the representative couldn't give me a straight answer. I apologize for that experience, sir. May I ask your name? David Johnson. I own Johnson Construction. Patricia jotted down the name. Mr. Johnson, I'd be happy to help you personally with this. Our online system sometimes flags applications for various reasons. It could be something as simple as an image being unclear. If you're available to come in today, I can make sure everything gets processed smoothly. There was a pause on the line. Is it necessary for me to come in? I provided all the documentation already. A month ago, Patricia might have insisted on the branch visit without thinking twice. Now she heard the wariness in his voice and understood what he wasn't saying. It's not strictly necessary. Mr. Johnson, I can review your application right now if you'd prefer. She pulled up the system on her computer. Can you provide your application reference number? After verifying his information, Patricia quickly spotted the issue. The system had flagged his application because the business was less than 2 years old, triggering an automatic review. Nothing to do with David Johnson himself. Mr. Johnson, I can approve your application right now. The flag was simply because your business is relatively new. Our system is programmed to review newer businesses, but there's nothing wrong with your application at all. Just like that? The surprise in his voice was evident. Just like that, Patricia confirmed. You should receive your account information by email within the hour. And Mr. Johnson, I'd like to apologize for any inconvenience or discomfort this process caused you. After they hung up, Patricia sat back in her chair. A month ago, she would have followed the system's recommendation without question, requiring Mr. Johnson to come in, bringing additional documentation, subjecting him to extra scrutiny. She wouldn't have considered how that experience might feel to him. Later that afternoon, James visited the branch for their weekly check-in. Patricia shared the morning's incident. So what did you do differently? James asked, leaning back in his chair. I listened to what he wasn't saying, Patricia explained. I heard his hesitation about coming into the branch and realized he was concerned about being treated unfairly. Then I looked beyond the system's flag to see if there was actually a valid reason for additional verification. James nodded, a small smile playing on his lips. And was there? No. The system flagged him automatically because his business is new. Once I checked the documentation he'd already provided, everything was in order. Patricia shook her head. We need to fix that algorithm. It's creating barriers that don't need to be there. You've come a long way in a month, James observed. Patricia felt a flush of pride mixed with lingering shame. I'm trying, but I keep discovering more blind spots. Last week, Dr. Wilson had us review our mortgage rejection rates by zip code, and the patterns were disturbing. That's why we're doing this branch by branch, James said. The problems are systemic. They're built into our procedures, our algorithms, our unstated assumptions. Changing a few people's attitudes isn't enough. We have to change the entire structure. Their conversation was interrupted by a knock on the door. Dr. Wilson entered with a thick folder. Sorry to interrupt, but I wanted to drop off the community outreach plans for your review, she said, placing the folder on Patricia's desk. We've identified 5 community organizations in underserved neighborhoods that might be interested in partnership opportunities. Patricia glanced at the folder. Community outreach? Phase 2, James explained. It's not enough to stop doing harm. We need to actively build bridges with communities that have learned to distrust banks like ours. Dr. Wilson nodded. The data shows that Black and Hispanic residents in our area are 5 times more likely to use check cashing services and payday loans than traditional banks. That's not just about individual choices. It's about institutional trust. Patricia thought about the check cashing service she had recommended to James that day. The irony wasn't lost on her. "We'll be hosting financial literacy workshops," Dr. Wilson continued. "But more importantly, we'll be listening. These communities know what barriers they face. Our job is to hear them and respond." After Dr. Wilson left, James stood to leave as well. "One more thing before I go. Regional headquarters is sending over a group of managers from other branches next week. They want to see what we're doing here." Patricia's eyebrows shot up. "They want to learn from us?" "But we've just started." "You're further along than you think," James replied. "And yes, they need to learn from your mistakes and your progress. I want you to lead the session." "Me?" Patricia felt a surge of panic. "But I'm the one who caused the problem in the first place." "Exactly." James's voice was firm but kind. "There's power in hearing someone say, 'I was wrong, and here's how I'm changing.' It's much more effective than theoretical training." After James left, Patricia sat alone in her office, staring at the community outreach folder. The thought of standing in front of her peers and admitting her biases made her stomach churn. But wasn't that discomfort precisely the point? For too long, people like her had been comfortable, while others bore the burden of systemic inequity. The following Monday, Patricia arrived at the branch to find 10 managers from other locations already gathered in the conference room. James and Dr. Wilson were there too, chatting with the visitors. Patricia's heart pounded as she entered the room. These were her peers, people she had worked alongside at regional meetings for years. What would they think of her now? James caught her eye and nodded encouragingly. "Everyone, we're ready to begin. Patricia Blackwell will be leading today's session." Taking a deep breath, Patricia moved to the front of the room. The faces watching her ranged from curious to skeptical to supportive. "Good morning," she began, her voice steadier than she expected. "A month ago, I failed one of our customers in the worst possible way. I made assumptions based on his appearance. I created unnecessary barriers. And I humiliated him by suggesting he use a check cashing service instead of our bank." She paused, meeting the eyes of her colleagues. That customer turned out to be our new owner, James Reynolds. A ripple of reactions spread through the room. Widened eyes, exchanged glances, a few uncomfortable shifts in seats. But here's the thing," Patricia continued. "Even if he hadn't been James Reynolds, even if he had just been an ordinary man trying to open an account, what I did was wrong. And I wouldn't have seen it if I hadn't been forced to confront it." For the next hour, Patricia shared the painful lessons she had learned over the past month. The data about discriminatory lending practices, the customer service disparities, the algorithms that reinforced bias. She described the changes they were implementing at Oak Street and the community partnerships they were building. "We're just at the beginning," she concluded. "But I invite all of you to join us in this work. Because our customers deserve better, our communities deserve better, and frankly, we should expect better from ourselves." When she finished, the room was quiet for a moment. Then one of the managers raised his hand. "I think I might have similar problems at my branch," he admitted. "How do we start?" As the conversation took off with managers asking questions and sharing their own experiences, Patricia caught James's eye across the room. He gave her a small nod of approval, and for the first time since that fateful day, she felt something like pride. The road ahead would be long and challenging, but at least now they were on the right path. 6 months had passed since that fateful day when James Reynolds walked into the Oak Street branch in his casual clothes, carrying a check that Patricia Blackwell refused to deposit. 6 months of hard work, uncomfortable conversations, and genuine change. The morning sun streamed through the windows of the newly renovated branch. Gone were the intimidating high counters that created distance between bankers and customers. In their place stood open desks where staff and clients could sit side by side to discuss financial needs. The walls, once adorned with stock photos of skyscrapers and luxury items, now displayed artwork from local artists representing the diverse community the branch served. Patricia adjusted her blazer and checked her watch. The ribbon-cutting ceremony for the reimagined Oak Street branch would begin in 30 minutes, and her stomach fluttered with a mixture of pride and nervousness. After today, their pilot program would become the model for all 15 branches in the regional trust network. "Everything looks perfect," said Thomas, her husband, who had taken the morning off to support her. "You've worked so hard for this," Patricia squeezed his hand. "We've all worked hard. I couldn't have done any of this alone. The staff began arriving, each wearing a new name tag that included the languages they spoke. Patricia greeted them warmly, noticing how different the atmosphere felt compared to 6 months ago. Back then, the morning huddles had been perfunctory, brief discussions of sales targets and account quotas. Now they talked about community needs and how to address barriers to financial inclusion. At precisely 9:45, the executive team arrived. James led the group, accompanied by Robert, Dr. Wilson, and several board members. Patricia welcomed them into her office for a final briefing before the ceremony. "The press will be here at 10, she explained, handing out the day's schedule. "We'll do the ribbon cutting, followed by tours of the redesigned space. At 11, we'll present the Community Partnership Program, and at noon we'll have a lunch reception where staff can mingle with community leaders." James looked around the office, noticing the changes. Where Patricia once had generic corporate awards on display, she now had photos of community events the branch had hosted, financial literacy workshops at the community center, small business mentoring sessions, and the grand opening of their satellite kiosk at the local community college. "It's remarkable what you've accomplished," James said. "When I bought this bank, I knew changes were needed, but I never expected such a comprehensive transformation in just 6 months." Patricia shook her head modestly. "We still have a long way to go. The mortgage approval algorithm still needs work, and our hiring practices—" "Patricia," James interrupted gently, "take a moment to acknowledge how far you've come. It's important to recognize progress, not just focus on what's left to do." She smiled, accepting the wisdom in his words. "Thank you. It's been the most challenging and rewarding 6 months of my career." At 10 a.m. sharp, Patricia stood before a crowd of community members, press, and staff. A bright red ribbon stretched across the entrance to the redesigned branch, and television cameras captured the moment. "6 months ago," Patricia began, her voice clear and confident, "a customer walked into this branch and was judged based on his appearance rather than his character or financial standing. That customer was James Reynolds, who had recently become the owner of our bank." She paused, making eye contact with familiar faces in the crowd: the pastor from the local church, the director of the small business incubator, the president of the neighborhood association. "I was the person who made that judgment," she continued, "and it became the most important mistake of my career. Instead of firing me, Mr. Reynolds challenged me to help create a banking environment that truly serves everyone in our community with equal respect and opportunity." Patricia gestured to the renovated branch behind her. "The changes you see today aren't just cosmetic. We've completely reimagined how we serve our community." She outlined the concrete changes they had implemented: a new mortgage pre-approval process that removed demographic information before review, financial advisors who spoke the languages of the community, extended hours to accommodate working families, and a mobile banking unit that visited senior centers and apartment complexes in underserved neighborhoods. "But perhaps the most important change has been in ourselves," Patricia said, her voice softening. "We've had to confront our own biases and rethink assumptions that were so ingrained we didn't even recognize them as choices rather than facts." James stepped forward to join her at the microphone. "What Patricia and her team have accomplished here is just the beginning," he said.
"Today we're announcing that the changes piloted
at Oak Street will be implemented across all 15 branches of Regional Trust Banking." Applause rippled through the crowd as James and Patricia together cut the red ribbon. Cameras flashed, capturing the moment for the evening news. As the ceremony transitioned to tours of the redesigned space, Patricia found herself explaining the changes to a reporter. "These transactions pods replaced the traditional teller windows," she explained, gesturing to the modern open stations. "There's no physical barrier between our staff and customers anymore, symbolically and literally." "And what about the private consultation rooms?" the reporter asked, pointing to the glass-walled spaces along the perimeter. "Those are for sensitive discussions, but notice that they're transparent," Patricia explained. "We want everyone to feel that banking processes are open and fair, not mysterious transactions happening behind closed doors." As Patricia led the reporter through the space, she spotted a familiar face entering the branch. David Johnson, the construction company owner who had been flagged by their system 6 months ago, was looking around with interest. "Excuse me a moment," Patricia said to the reporter. She walked over to greet David. Mr. Johnson, thank you for coming today. He smiled, extending his hand. I wouldn't have missed it. Your invitation mentioned that you wanted to showcase small business owners who bank here. Yes, we've set up a display highlighting local entrepreneurs, Patricia explained, leading him to a wall where photos and brief stories of business owners were displayed. Your company is featured, if that's still okay with you. David nodded as he looked at his photo and the brief story of how he had built his construction business from a two-person operation to a company employing 30 people from the local community. It's more than okay, he said. You know, when that system flagged my application, I almost walked away from your bank entirely. I'd had too many experiences of being treated like a risk rather than an opportunity. I'm glad you gave us a chance to fix it, Patricia said sincerely. What changed? David asked, gesturing around at the transformed space. Banks don't usually do this kind of overhaul unless they're forced to. Patricia smiled. We had a wake-up call. Our new owner showed us that we were failing part of our community. And instead of just pointing it out, he challenged us to fix it. As the day progressed, the branch filled with community members, many of whom had never set foot in the bank before. Children played in the newly added kids' corner, while their parents attended mini-workshops on first-time home buying and college savings plans. During the lunch reception, Patricia found a moment of quiet in her office. She was surprised when the door opened and James entered, carrying 2 plates of food. You should eat something, he said, setting a plate on her desk. You've been talking non-stop for 3 hours. Patricia accepted the food gratefully. It's been an amazing day. The community turnout is better than we expected. James nodded, taking a seat across from her. I have something to ask you, he said after a moment. The board has created a new position, Chief Inclusion Officer for the entire bank. I'd like you to consider taking it on. Patricia nearly choked on her food. Me? But I'm the one who made a mistake, acknowledged it, and then led the most successful transformation initiative in the bank's history. James finished for her. Your experience makes you the perfect person for this role. You understand both sides. How easy it is to follow biased systems without questioning them, and how important it is to change them. Patricia sat back, stunned by the offer. I would need to think about it. This branch feels like home now. Of course, James nodded. Take your time. But remember, what you've learned here could help transform all our branches. Later, as the event wound down, Patricia found herself standing outside the bank, looking at the new sign that read, Regional Trust Banking, your community partner. Thomas joined her, slipping an arm around her waist. Penny for your thoughts? She leaned against him, considering the day, the past 6 months, and James's unexpected offer. I was thinking about second chances, she said finally. How rare they are and how precious. Are you talking about the second chance James gave you? Thomas asked. Patricia shook her head slowly. Not just that. The second chance we're giving this community, to trust a bank that hasn't always deserved their trust. The second chance we're giving ourselves to be better than our biases. She paused. And maybe the chance to take what we've learned here and make it matter on a larger scale. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the parking lot, Patricia looked back at the bank one last time. 6 months ago, it had been just another branch in a corporate chain, serving some people better than others. Now it stood as proof that change was possible, not just in buildings or policies, but in people's hearts and minds. Whatever you decide about the new position, Thomas said gently, you've already made a difference here. Patricia nodded, thinking of all the David Johnsons who would walk into this bank in the future and be treated with the respect they deserved, and all the future James Reynoldses who would never have to prove their worth based on what they wore or how they looked. Yes, she agreed as they walked to their car. And that's worth everything.